Day 89. Iran says it struck a U.S. airbase in direct retaliation for a U.S. strike on a ground control station in southern Iran. And Ali Bagheri is in Moscow telling a named international conference that uranium stockpiles are not on the negotiating table at all.
This is Iran War Daily. I'm Brian, Cassidy's here, and yeah, the diplomatic lane and the military lane did not just drift apart today. They ran into each other.
We've got a direct U.S. Iran military exchange, 31 dead in Lebanon, and Seoul formally naming Iranian-made missiles in the HMM Namu strike. A third-party government conclusion, on the record, for the first time.
And then you've got a senior Iranian security official taking uranium stockpiles off the table, the same week Trump says a deal is close. Let's just say the contradiction is not subtle.
Elizabeth Melamopoulos, writing in Al Jazeera.
Israeli attacks across southern Lebanon killed at least 31 people and wounded 40 others on Tuesday, as Israeli forces intensified strikes and issued dozens of displacement orders for towns and villages in the country's south and east.
Day 89. Al Jazeera is reporting that Israeli strikes across southern Lebanon killed at least 31 people and wounded 40 on Tuesday, and that Israeli forces are pushing deeper into Lebanese territory under a ground operation Netanyahu is publicly directing. The ceasefire that was still nominally on paper as of April 17th now has a named escalation directive and a body count attached to it.
And while that's happening, Iranian officials are calling the U.S. strikes near the Strait of Hormuz a quote-unquote gross violation of the ceasefire, while the U.S. says those strikes were defensive, hit missile sites, and targeted vessels laying mines. So now the ceasefire is being violated in Lebanon by Israel, in Hormuzgan province by the U.S., and Tehran has already hit back at a U.S. airbase. That's 3 active fires.
To be precise here, the U.S. and Iranian accounts of the Hormuzgan strikes flatly contradict each other, and neither one has been independently corroborated. What's sourced is this: Iran named Hormuzgan province, and the U.S. described the strikes as defensive. Khamenei also used an Eid al-Adha message to warn Gulf states about U.S. bases. Named occasion, named audience, very specific warning.
Khamenei is sending that warning to Gulf states in an Eid message while U.S. air bases are under Iranian retaliatory fire. That's not diplomatic ambiance. He's telling the Gulf, pretty directly, your territory is not neutral ground.
Here's France 24.
The United States struck southern Iran on Thursday, drawing retaliation from Tehran against a U.S. military base in the most serious clashes since an April ceasefire began. The fighting, which drew in U.S. ally Kuwait, threatened to jettison a fragile diplomatic push to forge a peace agreement and open the Strait of Hormuz, which has become a key point of contention in efforts to formally end the war.
France 24 is reporting that U.S. forces struck a ground control station in southern Iran on Thursday, and Tehran answered with a strike on an American military base, the most serious direct exchange between the two principals since the April ceasefire framework took effect. What France 24 doesn't yet name is which base was hit, what command confirmed the Iranian counterstrike, or what the damage assessment looks like.
So now Tehran has hit back at an American base, and that puts the Hormuz talks under even more strain, which is a polite way of saying Iran fired on U.S. military infrastructure while its delegation was still nominally in Doha. That's not parallel tracks anymore. That's a collision.
The trigger IRIB itself reports is worth flagging. Iranian forces fired on 4 ships trying to cross the strait. Then U.S. strikes followed, and after that came the Iranian base hit. That's a named Iranian state broadcaster laying out the sequence. It's still a claim, but it is an on-record one.
And in the same week, Ali Bagheri is in Moscow, Deputy Secretary of the Supreme National Security Council, on record through WANA, telling a security conference that uranium stockpiles are not even on the negotiating table. So Tehran is hitting a U.S. base and pulling the core nuclear question off the table. Somebody explain what exactly was being negotiated in Doha.
This one's from Fox News.
The Kuwaiti military said early Thursday that its air defenses were responding to hostile missile and drone attacks. Officials did not immediately identify who launched the attack or what targets were involved. The incident came hours after U.S. forces shot down 4 Iranian one-way attack drones that posed a threat to vessels in the Strait of Hormuz, 2 U.S. officials told Fox News.
2 Iranian side signals on uranium landed within hours of each other Thursday. Ali Bagheri, SNSC Deputy Secretary, speaking in Moscow and sourced to WANA, said enriched uranium stockpiles are not on the negotiation agenda at all. Then Ibrahim Azizi, who chairs the Iranian Parliament's National Security Committee, posts on X that stockpile rights and Hormuz control are non-negotiable red lines. That's the legislative branch and the security apparatus saying the same thing out loud, the same day Trump told his cabinet that Iran is, quote-unquote, negotiating on fumes. Let's keep the Kuwait attribution question open for a second. Officials still haven't identified the launcher or the target. What we do have on the record is a Kuwaiti military statement confirming active air defense engagement. That's the fact. Who fired is still just a claim waiting for a named source. From WANA News Agency,
Bagheri, who is in Russia to attend the 14th International Conference of High-Ranking Security Officials, was asked about the fate of Iran's enriched uranium on the sidelines of the summit. He stated explicitly, "This matter is not on the negotiation agenda."
Ali Bagheri, Deputy Secretary for Foreign Policy and International Security at Iran's Supreme National Security Council, was asked directly about the fate of Iran's enriched uranium stockpiles on the sidelines of a named international security conference in Moscow. His answer, on the record to WANA, "Not on the agenda." That's the clearest attributed Iranian position we've had on the uranium question all week, and it settles the framing we'd been tracking since the anonymous U.S. official told CBS a disposal arrangement was effectively settled.
Bagheri is Moscow dateline, named title, named conference, specific question, specific answer, and the answer is no. Meanwhile, somewhere in the same 24-hour window, a Tasnim-sourced figure of $12 billion in frozen assets up front is still floating around as proof a deal is close. Those two signals did not come from the same part of the Iranian government apparatus, and you don't get to average them.
The Foreign Ministry spokesman Bagheri had already flagged that the 400 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium come wrapped in NPT rights language. That's the legal architecture Bagheri is now invoking from Moscow. What we still do not have is a named U.S. official, on the record, responding to Bagheri's specific formulation from this specific venue. Here's So Ji-un at Korea JoongAng Daily.
The Korean government on Wednesday concluded it was highly likely that Iranian-made anti-ship missiles struck the container ship HMM Namu near the Strait of Hormuz on May 4th. Iranian Ambassador Saeed Kuzechi categorically denied involvement later in the day.
Korea JoongAng Daily, byline, So Ji-un, published yesterday. Vice Foreign Minister Park Yoon-ju, at a government briefing in Seoul, said technical analysis of debris recovered from the HMM Namu points to the Noor series anti-ship cruise missile, Iranian-produced, as the weapon used in the May 4 strike near UAE waters in the Strait of Hormuz. That's a named official, a named conclusion, and a named missile type. Ambassador Saeed Kuzechi was summoned to the Foreign Ministry and categorically denied involvement.
A South Korean commercial container ship hit twice within a minute while anchored in UAE waters, and Seoul has now put Iranian-made Noor series cruise missile on the record. That's not a battlefield rumor. That's a flag state finding backed by debris analysis. So who's writing the hull loss policy for the next HMM vessel through that strait? And what does that premium look like the morning after this briefing?
It's worth separating what this resolves from what it opens. The attribution question on the Namu, which we'd been tracking as unconfirmed, now has Seoul's official finding behind it. A third-party government, not the U.S. or Israel, putting its name on an Iranian missile attribution. That's a new venue for this kind of finding, and Tehran's denial is now formally on the record beside it. If you want clear daily updates in a fast-moving crisis, try Ebola Watch, our weekday DRC and Uganda Ebola outbreak briefing, with case counts, border tracing, WHO vaccine news, and traveler guidance. Find it wherever you listen to podcasts. You'll find links to all of today's stories in the show notes, along with the source material behind each segment. If something caught your attention, that's the place to dig in a little deeper. That's Iran War Daily for this Thursday, May 28th. This is a Lantern podcast.